CEO and founder of an innovative category-leading training platform who's raised $85 million to avoid societal collapse in a marketplace of 3.3 billion people that you have the ability to help, and a $400 billion spend. Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Paul Morton, and we are talking about leadership, management, and the various lives that surround it. It's my joy, delight, and privilege to bring into my studio some of the smartest, wisest people I've been able to find for your delectation and enjoyment. And I hope that you do get a lot out of the conversations that we have here. When you realize that your management team has grown too fast, or you've inherited a new team, and the fastest, best lever you have for growth and improvement is attached firmly to those managers, get in touch. I help you run management, coaching, and training programs that'll make a big difference really quickly. You can find me at the Practical Leadership Academy website and on all the usual social channels. René Janssen, CEO and founder of Lepaya. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for this wonderful intro.
Well, I'm sure I did some shortchanging there, right? There's much more to you than that. Would you mind doing a very brief introduction for my listener?
Oh, I'm not sure if I can beat that intro, but as a humble Dutchman, but I'm a Dutch founder of a Dutch company, of a European company, Lepaya, where we help companies drive productivity and retention of their people by making sure that people have the right skills at the right time. That's in a nutshell what it's all about.
Well, that's a good pitch. Right. So that's the pitch that you train all of your salespeople. Look, guys, all you have to remember is this. When you're on the phone, it's just this, right?
And then it gets tough. I mean, right skills, right time. That's easy. And then what's right? But
you have t-shirts.
I do have t-shirts.
You do have t-shirts. I like that. So you've said variously that your reason for building Lepaya comes from your experience. Now, the best founders building the best businesses have suffered pain and have decided that, no, sod that, not enough. I'm not going to inflict that on anyone else. I am going to solve the world's problems and fix the pain with which I am familiar. Okay. So what was the pain you went out to fix?
Yeah, fully correct. And I agree that it really helps to have felt that pain before, because then you really go all out in fixing it. And Lepaya was a direct result of the previous company I was working for, which is a fairly well-known company, Lazada, one of those rocket internet-backed companies that try to bring e-commerce to parts of the world where there was no previous e-commerce. And I joined them a bit over a decade ago when they really were starting an e-commerce marketplace in the Southeast Asian countries, everything south of China and east of India, where 500 million people would probably want to shop online if there's a platform, because that also helped for the other people around the world, but there was no platform. I joined them first on the commercial side, so I helped kind of to scale up some of our countries, first Vietnam, then Indonesia, into kind of becoming, the go-to place from an e-commerce perspective. But what we kind of noticed is that as we grow, the number of people that we needed to bring on board to help us scale the company, grew more or less in line with that. And that's, of course, not what you want. So 2016, we were sold into Alibaba, and they noticed something that I'd been telling myself as the commercial lead for one of our main countries already, is that it was a bit odd that at 0.x% of the revenue of Alibaba, we were employing, kind of relatively speaking, 10x as many employees. And even though at subscale you need some more people, there was a clear challenge on productivity of our people. And that also led, of course, to retention issues, because if people feel they're not directly contributing, some people start to look for different opportunities. And sadly, your better people tend to look for opportunities faster than the other ones. Me having among the biggest crowds in the company in Indonesia, had suffered from that before. And it also had our debates with our leadership that said, hey, maybe we need to enhance our focus on HR and kind of managing the workforce to really making sure that we drive the workforce to the extent that they can really, step up to the increasing challenges. And when the dust settles after the acquisition, I got a phone call. Do you want to get out of Jakarta? Now, Paul, let me tell you, in any circumstance, you should answer that phone call with yes. But when that was followed with the question, do you want to move to Singapore to our head office and, well, solve the problem that you saw, which is how can we continue to scale the company without having to massively scale the number of people and retain the best people, i.e., take up the head of HR role? I said, well, I don't know much about HR. I've been a client, if nothing else, but I do think this is a big problem, and I'd love to help address it. But there's many things that feed into productivity, but in very simple terms, being clear on what you expect from people in certain levels of tenures in the company, not that depend in the whatever manager they report into, but be more or less fair and consistent about that is one of them. But at the moment you start saying, hey, as a sales leader or as a VP or as a starting trainee, this is the level I expect you to operate at before you can make a promotion. Well, the immediate next step comes, okay, these are my gaps. How can you help them fix that? And that's what I started to look for. So I had 5,000-6,000 people across 8 countries. I suddenly had skill gaps identified. And then the question is, how can you fix that? Well, these were in the times that there were a lot of e-learning players come up. But I think there's a great market for e-learning players. But one of the key characteristics is that typically 1 in 10 people engages in some of these e-learnings. If you have a fundamental challenge and your solution is only used by 10% of people, doesn't fly. So the only thing I could turn to was traditional learning companies, but this being Southeast Asia, this being the tech world, just doing multi-day offsites in fancy hotels for training purpose didn't seem to fit the bill. So I started to look for solutions where I said, how can I upskill my people in a way that makes as much use of technology as possible, but whether it regards human communication, whether it regards leadership, whether it requires management capabilities, which are innately human, we still bring in coaches, trainers, facilitators to focus on exactly these elements that are unique to us. And how do you bring that together? That's what we started to roll out. Focusing first on middle management, that tough spot where a lot of things come together, and then rolling it up to more senior management, going down to trainees, and really making sure that you start building a coherent set of capabilities and skills across the company. Long story short, I think I like building things, but if you need a great HR director, I can give you the names of some great people out there. So after a couple of years in that role, I've done a lot of building. I left and also thought, what's next in my career? And I thought, well, if I couldn't find a great kind of leadership or skills building solution out there, there must be other people suffering from this. So founded very opportunistically Lepaya to help clients with the exact same problem I faced. How can you, in today's day and age, right skills, right time, help people to be effective and therefore typically also happier? Because when do you come home with a smile on your face if you had a good day's work? And if you suffered and it was tough, well, it also has impact on your personal life. So I think it's one of these issues that helps society, but also that helps every single individual in the work.
And frankly, if we don't do something about it, who will?
Exactly. If not us, then who? If not now, then when?
Exactly. Change happens when people stand up.
I agree.
Totally. So you've got then the experience of the startup, the scale up, the acquisition by the billion-dollar Alibaba, the international growth there, worked in human resources. I actually quite like the words human resources. If you flip it round, it turns into resources that are human. And I think it starts to make more sense though. Because if you think of humans as resources, yeah, it's less personal. And I think,
to be fair, I was always a fan of the teams that rebranded HR teams into people teams because it made it more specific what it's about. But if you turn it the other way around, then I think it has that same ring that we're trying to get to. I agree.
There you go. And it is the people piece that I think differentiates what you're trying to do at Lepaya from pretty much everything else in the market. And you say that 1 in 10, I mean, I've worked with many different learning organizations, learning vendors, etc. And it is typically 10 to 20%, if you're lucky, organic usage of these different systems. But quite frankly, you could get 10 to 20% of anyone to do anything because they're going to be interested in the next shiny thing. Turn this thing on, somebody's going to push the button just to see what happens, right? So it's not impressive. It's not useful. If you're trying to affect meaningful strategic change and only 1 in 10 of the people are actually with the program, you ain't going to get very far very fast. So there's this disconnect that I think most people have in their organizations between what they've got this fabulous plan. They've hired lots of wonderful people, and yet just not quite firing on all 4 cylinders.
But the question indeed is, why are you not firing on all these cylinders if that's in place? And ultimately the question is, how can you make sure that people are collectively successful with each other? It's not about his hard skills. A marketeer being great at SEO, a developer writing great code is only useful in isolation. But when you connect those things together, writing website based on the value prop of sales that's coded in the right language and that's attracting your right MQLs, that's how you start to get an organization to grow. But all these difficult hard skill words that I dropped in there, those you can learn pretty quickly, and those you also will learn on the job, because that's what your direct feedback is going to be on. But ultimately, this flow starts to happen only if you sit together, if you align on your goals, if you identify the bottlenecks, if you do your stakeholder management properly, if you can charge the troops, if you need to change something and we're all going in the same direction. Those are all very human skills. And those human skills are much harder to acquire, since there's a reason in the past they were called soft skills, and the soft skills are typically the hardest things to get right. And the way in which we're teaching those soft skills are still a little bit stuck in the past. And in essence, it's about then drilling down into what are the challenges that are stopping people from being more productive, which is not on the hard skills front, it's on that collaboration front. And an interesting statistic I always find is the number of connections that we interact with kind of on an annual basis. And if you go all the way back about 25, 30 years to the mid-90s, the average professional would interact with about 150 different individuals over the course of a year in a professional setting. That today has gone up to 450. That's about threefolded. That means your effectiveness just in dealing with information, with others, and making decisions and getting alignment and all of that has probably even manifolded. Because those people, they didn't come at you in one-on-ones, but they came at you at networks. So there was an exponential growth in how to be effective. And well, if you're being honest and look 25 years back, I don't think the way in which we teach human effectiveness, leadership, interaction, social skills has seen an exponential growth. And that's what's necessary.
I think that soft skills are best learned from soft people. You need to learn how to do things, how to deal with other people from other people. Yes, you can pick up theory. Yes, you can understand the model, but you need to have it in the context of a human example, or at least a human who you can ask questions of, who can phrase things in the right way and reframe things in your context. So it's this of the coaching, training, that combination that is how we've done things forever. You've learned how to best get along with your fellow cave dwellers from other cave dwellers. You didn't read about it by looking at the drawings on the wall, You could have learned about hunting from looking at the drawings on the wall, because that's a technical skill, right? But how do you get on with other humans? How do you pick this up?
Exactly that. And then I think we luckily in a day and age that technology can play a role. Because there's, of course, theories that make sense. There's an approach that makes sense. And some people would acquire that knowledge and that understanding better by looking at a study on paper or by watching a video about it. But then actually getting into that practice requires real-time feedback. And even in the day and age of AI, where you can get some useful feedback out of this. I mean, if you would have AI running on this call, I would be able to get the feedback that says, maybe you're talking a little bit too fast and not dropping enough pauses in, and maybe, luckily it's a podcast, but you're moving your hands a bit too much in all of that. But kind of if you push that one level deeper and say, hey, how are you really going to get in front of a, let's say, challenging crowd and take them along on a change journey? Well, I really think and hope that that's still going to be human, and that you do need other humans to learn that kind of interaction.
So you've got two layers that I can tap into here, two layers of wisdom. One is your own experience in many large organizations, some small organizations. You started your own company. You're now the CEO of a fairly reasonable size, fast growing organization, raised a ton of cash. People believe in you. You only have to return 3 times investment.
Exactly. Almost there.
Almost there. And the bonus is that you get to talk to very many organizations. You get the feedback from all your sellers. You get the feedback from your network, your information, and the people you're learning from. You're evidently a learner. If you gathered all that together, what would be the most valuable thing that you could pass on to some other manager or leader in another organization? The one.
No, me longer than today, Paul. And I struggle with one. Yeah. No, so I think it is really seeing talent management, learning and development, people development as a strategic function. So the moment you're responding to business leaders saying, hey, my team is not doing well at X, can we get a training on Y? You're very far from the mark. What you would love to do is get an assessment. Hey, what does our organization probably need today in terms of skills, where we are still falling short against our own standards and maybe against some industry benchmarks. And then let's push ourselves to make the analytical jump to what are some of the areas we need to develop more into. So what are the skills that we're going to need in 1, 2, 3 years from now? Be very strategic and thoughtful about it. It's not an easy exercise, but I always say it's an easy exercise. I would do it myself because that's where you need really smart people to help you out with that. And once you have kind of those gaps, be very considerate in offering your people not just one career track, don't believe in that at all, or one growth track, but also not just all kind of training opportunities out there, but say, hey, there's 4 or 5 kind of key directions that we need to develop our workforce into. This is what you can choose from given where you stand today, and that's the direction you can evolve into. So very much kind of finding the balance between having people pick and choose what they enjoy, also based on their personal aspirations and where they want to go in life, but linked to the business objectives that you have. And if you get those two together, so clarity what you need and finding that real push-pull between what do people want and what do you need as an organization, I think those are going to be the organizations that outcompete their competitors over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I say deliberately that the highest leverage task anyone can perform in leadership is people development.
For sure, yeah.
You know, if I take you who is good at something and turn you into somebody who's outstanding at that thing, I take good and I make it outstanding across the board, I move the needle incredibly powerfully. You know?
And the beautiful thing is you actually move it twice, because this person is one today and tomorrow going to be happier and more effective and better at what they do. But because as an organization you invest in them, they're also likely to stay longer. So actually the value you create multiplies.
There's a third level to that as well, which is most organizations, most people don't think truly, they don't play chess. Okay, you move the thing once and then something else happens. Most people think about the move and maybe about the other thing. What happens after that move? What happens after that move is you've trained the person, which is great. So then they're likely to stay, which is great. But if you've done that and that person's a manager, you've just improved the lives and the performance and the productivity of the cascade of teams that go below that person. That's powerful.
That's why you start to.
Yeah. This is the luck surface area, right? There's an idea of luck surface area. People like to be lucky, right? So you go where the luck is. You want to give somebody one job performance, one potential pathway forwards. Well, you don't want to give them 50, as you said, but give them 5.
Exactly.
The organization, you've now made the organization 5 times as lucky. That's powerful.
That's super powerful. And I'm going to drill it down. It's all about indeed quiet hiring. So figure out what skills you need in a couple of years from now. Don't then go out and hire these people, but slowly build the organization and your workforce in that direction. We all spoke and thought about quiet quitting, which is of course something no organization is looking forward to. But the quiet hiring, the exact opposite, is I think what a lot of companies should focus a lot more on.
So quiet hiring, building people up from inside. You said people development needs to be a strategic function. How do I do that? I've got an organization of 250 people. What are the 3 things I need to do to make this a strategic set of activity?
Everything starts, of course, with some top level aligning that this is a priority. Because if all your MT meetings are going to be about sales for this quarter and about a product roadmap for maybe the next quarter, and at best you speak about the next performance management cycle, if it regards the HR function, you're not going to get there. So I think truly being convinced that this is important is step 1. And well, there's many ways to do that, but it starts there. If then you're convinced that that's the step, the question is, are you properly resourced for this? So do the people that make up, let's say, your people function or your HR function, are these operational people that run your salaries and your performance cycles and plan trainings? Or are these people that fundamentally understand what you're after as a business and can translate that into interventions, whether that's training or learning or performance management or the comp and band plan, that will meaningfully drive those, that can meaningfully drive these business goals one step forward. They will not one-on-one be the driver of that. I mean, if you increase your prices tenfold, you can train your staff all you want, but your sales are not going to go up. But the best developed sales force will yield bigger results than other teams. So, but do you have the right capabilities, mindset, experience in your HR teams to drive that forward? And then do you set them the right task? So if you go about asking them, hey, can we do this massive capability needs analysis, which builds on the old training needs analysis, which was all about asking people what they want to learn, probably you're not going to get them. We're kind of compiling where do we stand today, leverage tools that can make assessments also leverage research reports that for most industries have already quite neatly mapped out what your likely gaps are going to be and complemented with inside out data, then you have a good basis, and that you can build your skill trajectories on. And the last thing I'll add to that is ultimately data. Because ultimately, if you start collecting a lot of data on not just who did what training, but where can we measure that it moved the needle, which behaviors were actually put in practice. Can we do, you really want to be strategic about this kind of A/B studies, because it's even if you're just talking simple, large training programs, you're not going to roll them out all at once. So if you say, okay, we start in this business unit, or we start in this country, or we start in this team, can we say that in the 6 months after the training, let's say on customer service, first-time resolution rate has gone up? Or if you talk about leadership, has the retention in the teams that those leaders that went through programs, the retention has gone up? Or can you really just make it very specific? What do you want to achieve? And do you want to kind of make the effort, which is typically pretty small, compared to the effort you're putting into the whole kind of initiative, on measuring and being honest to yourself whether you're driving success? And do you then want to act on that? Because in my experience, especially first times, you're not going to get everything right. You see some very promising results, and in other domains, you're not going to see any results. Well, what does that cause? Are we training the wrong behavior, or is it not being applied in practice? Or are we trying to measure the wrong results? But it takes a while to really become kind of an organization which internalizes this. And it starts, and my circle is there, but from aligning the organization on top level around this. So it's not something that an HR team just does. It's something that the management team or the executive team needs to do, and needs to put the time, resources, commitment, focus in place to make it.
Thank you. How to quietly hire, how to make it strategic. I think there are two types of HR person. One is the professional HR who does pay, who does benefits, that sort of thing. And that's a professional person who's come from that background, which is great, but typically very disconnected from business. The second, which I've seen be quite successful, is where you have a professional business person step into an HR role for a year, 18 months, 2 years, something like that. And that can bring a lot of insight, but disconnected from the fundamentals of how you manage. But you can support people like that because they bring a lot. And it's what I've seen really, really effective is where you have sales or marketeers in that role, because they're used to, exactly as you said, they're used to developing pipelines. They're used to developing programs, testing things, and understanding that stuff needs to iterate. You don't put it in place and it runs for 20 years. You put it in place, you test it, and then you fix it and fix it and fix it and fix it, and you're never done. You're never done.
I fully agree with you, Paul, but I'm going to add two things to that. So on the first, and then having stepped outside into an HR role myself, I'm a big fan, and that's also why I was allowed to step into it, because the organization shared that vision of having non-HR people step into an HR role. But also beyond kind of, let's say, what I tend to call people operations, the salaries and the payment and admin, there is science to it. So adult learning is a science, but also comp and benefits. There's lots of research already what works and what doesn't work. People engagement is, of course, not a new subject. So balance out, I would say, the people that really know the organization with the people that have the craft that you need in the HR space, and make sure they cross-fertilize each other, because that's ultimately where the power is going to be for that the power or the value is going to blossom. And which was the second point I was going to mention. Those sales and marketing people. I think there's one important skill typically is less prevalent in HR teams. It's actually just those simple sales skills. So the fact that something is available doesn't mean that the other party sees the value of it. And even just getting that cross-fertilization going. I think one of the first books I read on learning and development by a lovely Israeli professor had a whole chapter about marketing your L&D programs. And I was like, what does that make sense? And I was like, that makes total sense. And in essence, it's one of the more important functions of it. Because if you're sitting in a plant far away and getting those emails from corporate HR, these are the emails that typically drop easiest into your trash bin. So how do you make sure that you communicate the value and the impact and not what you're doing? And that's not something that always comes naturally.
And it's such a low bar. It's such an easy thing to step over because the bar is very, very low. If you build it, they will not come. If you build it and sell it to them, you might, what's in it for me? Well, here's a testimonial. Here's a feedback. Here's a case study. Here's this stuff. It's just simple stuff. Okay, we're going to move to wrap up. So, in the context of this, how does Lepaya fit into this idea that people development needs to become a strategic function?
I think we do two things there, right? I think I try, let me make that very personal, to put that on the map by being out there, by speaking at many HR conferences, by speaking to you today, but we're really explaining not just why I think it needs to be strategic. Who cares what is strategic and tactical operational, but what the value is that I think we can unlock by moving into that strategic operation. Ultimately, I think it's a matter of life and death on company level. So the most competitive ones will get this right. But then secondly, there's that big how question. And those are huge questions. The question is, what should I now do tomorrow? And both in terms of focus, priority, and then how should I execute on that on a company-wide or sometimes even global scale? That's exactly what we do as a company. So once you have decided as a company that this is important and you're going to move away from training as an operational kind of function to learning and development or upskilling as a strategic imperative, give us a call and we'll be there to help.
If you had 10,000 billboards all around the world and you wanted to share just one message, what would it be?
It's a tough question to ask me on the spot. I'll tell you that there is the reason my marketing team gets a lot of freedom, because they tend to look at my input and smile and nod and say, thank you for your input, and now we continue with our business. So this is definitely not my forte, but if I make it gimmicky, I would go back probably to some version of the meme that you have seen floating all around the internet. What happens if we train people or develop or upskill our workforce and they leave? Well, that's by no means worse than if we don't. Than if we would not upskill our workforce and they stay. And I think ultimately it's as simple as that. The right companies will continue, and more will continue to very strategically invest in people. And today, if not today, then when should you invest?
Well, if not today, then when is probably a fairly good phrase to put on your bill.
Bit generic maybe, but that's why you have the marketers. They can make it a bit more concise even. Yeah.
René Janssen, CEO, founder of Lepaya. Thank you very much indeed for joining.
Well, thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for joining me. If there's ever anything I can do to help you on your journey, then do please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn and all the usual sources. Do please subscribe, leave me your 5-star review, and most importantly, get in touch with your comments and feedback. It's really how I grow, and that's what I'm doing this for. Thanks again.